Hello, and today I'm joined by Dr. Simon Lack, who is physiotherapist and also head of research at Pure Sports Medicine. Simon, how are you doing?
Hi, Andy. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, we're enjoying the warm weather, although in Manchester it's probably even not quite as warm as it is in London. But how are you coping with that?
Yeah, it's definitely heating up here, but it's all good. It's nice to see the sun out, and yeah, and looking forward to it. Bit of summer coming our way. It's always good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, you've got an interesting career, so I'm looking forward to hearing more about it because I know our paths have crossed at Pure Sports Med and other areas as well. So, like, where are you from originally?
Born and bred on the south coast, actually, down in a town called Christchurch, which is near Bournemouth, Dorset, and yeah, so that was kind of where I hailed from, and then came up to uni in God, whenever that was now. That's a few years back, isn't it? 2003 or something. Ended up at Brunel University in West London, which at the time was they had a campus in Isleworth, which was just by Richmond. And we always used to talk about how that was going to be the nicest place that we get to live whilst being a student. So that was a good time. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's lovely around there, isn't it? I was in Richmond not a few weeks ago, and it is just I love it around there.
Yeah, yeah, we definitely felt out of place as we were kicking about in our student get up. So yeah, but yeah, then carried on from that. Really, I did the usual undergraduate program in physio and did our placements and various different rotations. And then one of the placements, I just really sort of uh, had a good time and got on well with the team, and that was down at Royal Surrey in Royal Surrey County Hospital. It was in Guildford there, and they had a junior post offering just as I was coming up to finishing my degree. So I applied, and that's kind of where the world of physio sort of began for me. Doing the old-fashioned junior rotations, going through the different wards, different areas. But no, I always, I mean, I hark back to that now when I'm speaking to students or I'm speaking to physios and sort of said, oh, what did you do early days, and did you not enjoy the respiratory stuff now that you're working within sport or MSK settings? And I just for me it's all rehab really. It doesn't matter what we're talking about, whether you're on the wards or you're helping that footballer to return. It's all rehab, and so you learn lots even when you're in intensive care and you're in those ward settings of just taking someone from A to B, and whether that's them sort of trying to perform up at that top level or you're trying to get out of bed, that's still, I just feel those principles apply. And so that was a really solid grounding. I enjoyed it, and had a great time sort of, yeah, learning my trade, as it were, really.
And so, where did the desire to do physio in the first place come from?
Yeah, question, really. Well, no, it's not a good question. I know the answer to that. I had a real love for sport. I've always enjoyed sport, and I had a real interest in medicine. And so, uh, for me, that's where physio just fitted in fantastically. Sort of that blend of active lifestyle, exercise, fit and healthy type mindset, and medicine, a means to facilitate getting people to that if injury or illness has prevented them from doing it. So yeah, it was good. I mean, I was kind of drawn to medicine initially, but it didn't give me that. It didn't seem to offer me that same sort of opportunity to work with people to get them to those sorts of to those objectives, to those outcomes. Right?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And did you have any idea around like the research element of things that you've gone on to do now? Was that something that you had an aptitude for?
No, definitely not in my early days. That's not sort of, oh, I went into physio thinking, oh, I'm going to take on a career around research. That wasn't in my mindset at all. But I sort of engaged with the research a lot when I was in my juniors. I used to read a lot just because I was kind of one of those physios that sort of was, I don't think frustrated is the right word, but I was looking for reasons and for explanations as to why, like this approach seems to work, but why, and so I took to reading the evidence in order to try and find some explanations for that. And that sort of got me engaged with the evidence a bit, and then I went away traveling, worked overseas as a physio in New Zealand for better part of a year, and I just really enjoyed that line of work. But when I came back, I sort of found I was still sort of missing the answers to kind of what we were doing, and I sort of saw a further line of study as a means to explore that. And so my master's came along, and I sort of wanted to build my confidence and build my understanding of the sort of the profession of what we did. And when I was there, I met Christian Barton, who is a researcher and physio who was based and did his PhD out in Australia, but he was at Queen Mary University doing a bit of work for a year, and he sort of was my supervisor, and he was really enthusiastic about research and what information it can bring. And so so under his sort of tutelage at that stage, I embarked in a literature review, or became a systematic review, and then did our research project in the lab. And I was like, oh, this is sort of starting to sort of scratch that itch of why, and understanding what's going on in the background. You know, what is it that exercise intervention might be having an effect, or that insert into a shoe might be having an effect, or whatever it might be. And so so that's kind of where, that's where that interesting research began. And so straight after I finished my master's, I sort of reached out to Dylan Morrissey, who's the professor there, academic lead at QM, and he sort of said, well, what about undertaking a PhD? And so I carried on doing my clinical work part-time and doing a PhD part-time over what was the subsequent 5.5, 6 years.
In terms of that wanting to understand stuff more, was that were other people the same as you? Were you more inquisitive, do you think?
I don't know really whether I was more inquisitive. I think the guys down at Royal Surrey were a good group to work with. You know, where you sort of have those people around you who all are inquiring, or all kind of sort of questioning, wanting to know why, like just sort of not just accepting it as being, oh well, that's just kind of what's been told. You know, they're sort of wanting to add to the information knowledge that we've got, rather than just receive it and act upon it. And so I think that was a good environment to sort of build that interest and that appetite, for sure.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting when you're in these. It's like, are you genuinely seeking to find out things, or is it you trying to prove something wrong or right? And I don't know if there's ever like a right or wrong way of doing these things. But yeah, it's nice to hear that you just like you're looking. You're not sure exactly what you're looking for. It sounds like.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that's kind of what the PhD is all about. Actually, it's that you've got a question. You're not going into it kind of just sort of hitting and hoping sort of stuff. You've got a research question that underpins your line of thinking around your PhD. But it is a discovery time. It is a real, you know, we talk about it as being on the edge of what's known and what's not known. It definitely is time spent in that space. So you start a lot more comfortable in these sort of like, I don't know why that kind of is effective, but we kind of know it is, and sort of can we reconcile that with appropriate methodology or study. So you know, that just really sort of lit up something in my mind, I suppose, in my brain, that was just like, this could be a really good thing to do going forwards. Keep me interested in the profession almost as I sort of pursue it, going for probably quite a few years, right?
Well, yeah. What did you see that being then? Like, did you have any vision as to what your role was going to be like this time of life now?
I was a little bit geeky like that as a youngster, in that I sort of wrote out, when I sort of decided I was going to go to physio, I sort of wrote out some stuff that I was quite interested in, and that sort of what kind of informed my decision making. So if someone sort of said, oh, do you want to do this? I was a bit like, I'd go, well, does that fit into this sort of wider objective of what I want to do? And I always talked about wanting to engage with patients, with athletes and so on, at a younger age, such that they weren't maybe professional athletes, sort of fully established, knew what they were doing in that development kind of phase. So that took me to my role at the University of East London, where I work with a high performance program there. And these are scholarship athletes or talented athletes at a young age. We've got the East London Sports, which is a development pathway. So we're sort of nurturing these young athletes to sort of understand their bodies, understand injury and so on, and how to ensure that they that one injury isn't the defining one for their potential career. So so that was one bit. And this understanding of why, or this want to understand why, that's come through my career. That's not something I set out early on to establish. That's kind of, that interest has grown as I've done more, I think, within the profession.
And do you see that ever stopping, that you're going to constantly be asking that question or feeling like
that? Sometimes I think, oh, what am I doing? This is extremely hard work. Because the thing is that you have to balance. Well, you have to spin plates, really. You know, like you don't have to. That's wrong, actually. I like to have a foot in both camp, or I like to have at least two or maybe even three plates spinning. I like what research can kind of bring, but I personally could not be a full-time researcher. Like, I've got some fantastic colleagues. You know, one of my really good mates, Bradley Neal, who I've done a lot of work with. He's taken the sort of the step to become a full-time academic. And actually, interestingly, he did that for a time, and now he's come back and he's got a mixed role of being in clinical practice and in research and academia in that way. So for me, I don't foresee doing that 100%, because what I really like is the cross talk between the two worlds. I enjoy being a clinician. That is my one true love. COVID taught me that, is that I really enjoy working with patients and helping them on a n=1. But with my research hat on, what I can see is that there's an opportunity to have a sphere of influence that is much broader than that one individual that I'm treating. You know, I'd like to talk a little bit about our best practice guide in patellofemoral pain as one example. Like, we produced this paper, is published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine. It's an open access paper, and this is aiming to define what best practice for patellofemoral pain looks like. And for that project, as just sort of trying to splice this in there, for that one project, now we've taken expert opinion, we've taken patient interviews and systematic review, and pulled them all together, sort of triangulated them into a synthesis that is an output of how we think patellofemoral pain should be optimally managed. And that, you know, our real job and our want right now with that is to translate that and get that out into the physio community and wider medical communities, so that it has an influence over the way in which everybody, like in a dream world, you know, like everybody is treating people with patellofemoral pain in this optimal way. And like, I look at that and that excites me about research. If I can do some work, this body of work that's been informed by clinical practice, and get it out into the wider community and actually have it influence practice, like that's great.
And I think that's one of the things that that I think of. So I did sports science at university, and that when we go into, if I'm taking in some product or one of our team is taking to show them something, we'll get asked that question: what's the research on this? What's the evidence on this? And I think sometimes it's a genuine trying to understand things. A lot of the time it feels like it's a throwaway comment of almost, come on mate, prove what you're talking about isn't BS, tell us about that. So what do you think is a good way to frame a question that's engaging in research, or because it's such a broad term, research, and you just mentioned what I think is a really cool way of doing it, where you're amalgamating a few different things of qualitative and quantitative. What do you think is a good way of using research or applying it?
Yeah. So in that example of what you were talking about, right, I look at that as innovation, right? You've got some innovation trying to come into a clinical space, and we need innovation. We need innovation to drive the profession forwards. We need innovation to drive medicine forwards. And someone coming up with a new idea in which to try and affect change in that space is super, and I really want to support it. Like, it's just a great thing. And so within pure sports medicine, we're doing just that. Actually, we're taking on, let's say, a piece of equipment or a technology, and we're saying, right, let's put a bit of credence behind that, but in a really applied way, because no technology is going to come onto the market that hasn't been sort of CE tested or whatever is some of those sorts of key requirements in order for it to be put into clinical use. But what we're then sort of saying is, it's all very well having this nice shiny bit of kit, but how does it get applied? How can it actually be implemented into practice? And so at Pure, we're trying to support a pipeline for that. So we are doing, just like we've talked about with the best practice, we're going to do some focus groups with patients and with clinicians and say, look, we've got this shiny bit of kit. How do you see it working? Where do you see that fitting into your management pathway? And then what we're going to do is try and run a really pragmatic study that aims to embed that into practice and see how effective it is, see what sort of effects it has. And it's a bit down and dirty. That it's not like an RCT, which is like, sort of £1 million to get off the ground and so on. We're not talking about that level. We're talking about just trying to create a little bit of momentum towards a piece of innovation that means that, that could actually have some legs, and that could really grow and could really have a positive influence over patient care. And so when I say engaging with you, I think that's that sort of pragmatic implementation-based science is the engagement with research in a doing sense that I think is really important. And then a critique of the evidence is the second piece. So if there's an approach or an intervention that's looking to be adopted widely, I think it's right that people go to the evidence. I think they should have the skills to be able to scrutinize the evidence. We talk about that. I do a Research Thursday email that goes around, and we're often sort of to the whole company at Pure. And with that, I'm trying to instill this critical appraisal of the evidence. When you look at a systematic review, just because it's a systematic review doesn't mean that's accepted as gold. That there are very many different levels of quality of systematic review, and so we've got to be able to, as clinicians, to do a bit of scrutiny over that before we then say, oh yeah, I'm going to adopt that and put it into practice. So that's how I kind of see this. I think there's an engaging and a doing component, which I think can be really practical, really pragmatic. And I think that a lot of clinicians have the skills to be able to do that and should look to try and embed that into their practice. And then they should really be asking the question of, can I scrutinize an aspect of the evidence well enough such that I can confidently embed it into practice? And if you can develop those two skills, I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it comes back to what you were saying before of challenging things, asking why, but framing it in a positive way rather than. I feel like there is a lot of that's not. It's quite sometimes a lot of negative assessment of something where you may disagree or challenge something, but it doesn't always have to be. He doesn't know what he's talking about. That's crap. Blah, blah, blah. I don't know if that's an accurate reflection of how you see it in that, but it feels like there's quite a lot of mud throwing at things in the medical community that's he doesn't know. It's quite a negative thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really difficult thing to unpack, isn't it? Because quite a lot of that strong polarization is a bit agenda driven, I think, potentially. If there's a really good basis on which to have a sort of negative opinion, then fair enough. But where you're probably seeing some of that real strong critique, throwing it away type sort of statements, is probably more on the social media sort of platforms, really, isn't it? Because people are trying to make a name for themselves by being somewhat contrary or disagreeing, and I don't know. I've never wed myself that strongly to social media. Really, I do see it's a really powerful medium, and I think some people do. They commit a lot of time and effort into doing it. But when we do sort of have discussions, and certainly throughout my PhD and subsequently, that you very quickly realise that we don't live in a strongly binary world. We don't, and we don't really have the evidence to be so black and white about it. We do exist in grey, but grey is a very, very uncomfortable place to live all your time. You got to hang your hat onto something. And particularly as a clinician in front of a patient, which is why I don't ever not want to treat patients, is because I know that when I'm sat in front of a patient, I've still got to make a decision. I've still got to inform them in a certain way and tell them what I know. Or I present them with a bit of grey and I say, look, this is to the best of our knowledge, this is what is the right decision, but it's a bit of unknown. And that's how I see shared decision making, if I'm honest. That's that kind of thing of like, I know some things are pretty close to being known, but nothing's ever fully known. There are some things that are quite a long way from being known, but that's something we've got to figure out together, you and I, Mr. Patient, and off you go with this kind of information, and maybe here's a bit more reading for you to do and for you to make a decision. But yeah, I think about a patient who was in clinic with me yesterday. She was mortified, tears rolling down because she felt like she'd sort of been forced into making decisions about an intervention, as it turns out, as someone with pain at the front of their knee, and somewhat forced into making a decision to have a fat pad debridement type procedure surgically. This is just one example, and you could tell that almost that conversation of shared decision making kind of hadn't happened really. It was sort of like, this is the best thing, this is what you need, boom, rather than that presentation of, well, look, you could back right away and let this settle and it could take time and so on. But all of that has got to be taken into consideration. That's obviously her sort of history and sort of remembering. But that's how I kind of see it.
And I think the point you raised there is an interesting one there, where you're saying it's that you're engaging with the client and getting their input and asking for their, it's a collaborative piece where you're working with them on it as well. Is that, how commonplace is that, would you say, in your experience in clinical practice?
How common is shared decision making? I think that it is definitely talked about. I think it is definitely known to be something that is important. I think that there will be various levels of competency and capability in doing it, and I think that there will be a huge spectrum of the frequencies of it happening or not. So yeah, that's a really sort of vague answer. It's because I don't really know the answer, right? It's just kind of like, how often does that happen or not happen? I've seen some examples of that happening beautifully. I've seen some examples of that not happening at all. So it's clearly on a continuum.
Yeah, and in terms of that teaching, then, when you're teaching the students and so on now, like what part, because you've got a really, again, I think from the backgrounds of people that I've met, you have got quite a unique one in the work that you do. So for that teaching, how are you teaching them around that piece of it rather than just say the clinical bit?
Yeah, well, we so our postgraduate program obviously is a number of different modules within it, and in some of those core modules, it's about assessment and it's about management of patients or of athletes, and in each of those we are in each of those modules it is happening. We are ending or using case scenarios, case examples as a medium, as a means to teach some of that sort of clinical reasoning, some of that decision making piece. So and then we get our students into clinic, and they're sat in clinic and they're observing and they're asking questions within clinics as well, or in clinical environments. So it is applied. It is quite a practical kind of sense of, well, it's a practical skill. And so that's probably the main way in which we're trying to get it across.
Mm. Yeah, no, it's interesting. And so going back to your career then, so you'd been at Surrey, at Guildford,
Yeah.
and then what happened next?
So after, well, sorry, that's when I went traveling. That's when we went and worked in New Zealand. Came back after our stint out in New Zealand, and
How was New Zealand actually? Like, was that
oh,
like traveling as well as work, or?
amazing! It was amazing. Yeah, we did a bit. We did travel, but we worked for the most part of our time in New Zealand, but then did a month in a camper van heading around the country and stuff. But the people were lovely. The climate was great. They were super active, super friendly people. Like, and just the backdrop. We were down in QT in Queenstown whilst we were there, and you wake up and you've got the mountains there and the lake, and it's kind of, yeah. You said if it was even half as close to home as it is, then I probably would have given it a lot more thought as to whether I'd sort of move out there. But yeah, I didn't. Both my wife and myself even are close to our family, so that I don't think that would have gone down well if we were if we were going to set up camp down there. But yeah, brilliant time, and learned a lot, and a lot about the clinical reasoning process, a lot about I was given a lot of opportunity out there to work in sport. I worked with professional golfers, I worked with football clubs, rugby clubs, yeah, all really practical, great experience.
How did you get those opportunities?
Yeah, I think that's just luck, really. I mean, I applied for a job that was on offer out there, and it just so happened that Nicky Patel was the guy that I worked for. He was a chiropractor, so that was, that was an interesting introduction to a different profession as well, a different way of doing things. But he was super well connected, and he worked within each of those sorts of different sporting backgrounds, and he'd done a lot of that. So he saw, I showed an eagerness to learn and an eagerness to do, and was happy to give up weekends and travel, and just get stuck in, as it were, and lo and behold, opportunity sort of followed that enthusiasm.
Yeah, great. And then, so what made you come back, and like, what did you come back to?
Yeah, well, came back to the unknown, really, where you sort of step out and you go, oh gosh, I might have, sort of totally kiboshed my opportunity to get a job or whatever. But actually, it was the greatest catalyst to progression that I feel like I probably could have had. So I came back into a locum role within the NHS, which was brilliant. Then I went into private practice, working for a company called Six Physio. Then I did my master's. Then I did. Then I moved from Six, and I started working at Pure Sports Medicine, and that's where I've been for the last 12 years now.
So what was it like going from those NHS facilities? I know you'd been overseas, but going into private clinics, like how did you find that transition?
Um, how did I find that transition? I think I found that all right, really. I mean, in New Zealand, we were kind of working it's a sort of hybrid system out there, or it was at the time. So it was kind of a bit like a private practice then. And then I came back to NHS, and the NHS role that I had, it was a really good facility, great team, very busy, but um, sort of, yeah, like the space was good, and you were able to adapt and do the things that you needed to kind of do. And yeah, got into private practice, and maybe it was a bit shinier walls and slightly newer paint job or whatever, but and you weren't behind a curtain, you were in a room, and I think that's kind of maybe one of the sort of the bigger bits. It wasn't quite as much background noise and everything else kind of going on, um but other than that, you're doing your thing. You're listening to people's stories. You're looking at the move, and you're assessing them, and you're problem solving, and you're trying to find some solutions to the problems that they've kind of got. And that's what I enjoy doing. And so yeah, I enjoyed the time. I think I definitely had more time in private practice than I did within the NHS. That was the real treat, I think. And yeah, and you sort of probably had a group of patients with many fewer comorbidities. You had sort of the real challenge I found within an NHS setting was that you you were dealing with people who are a long time down the lane with their problem, and we look at all the evidence now, coming back to the evidence, and one of the strongest predictors or predictors of outcome or prognostic factors is symptom duration. And I couldn't help but find that a real challenge within the NHS. You were seeing people who had something which you think, oh, if I could just catch you a bit earlier in your injury or pain journey, I feel like I probably could have affected change much more powerfully. And that's probably what drew me to private practice.
Yeah. So what was it about Pure Sports Med, that opportunity there that made you end up there?
The real win with Pure is the team and the environment, really. Yeah, team's brilliant because it's a multidisciplinary team. We've got the docs there for whom you're having corridor conversations with. You've got the podiatrists, you've got your soft tissue, you've got your strength and conditioning, all under one roof. And so you're doing a lot of learning being in that environment. So that's one. But the thing I probably love the most is that every facility that we've got at Pure is built with a very similar philosophy in mind, which is you've got your clinical room, which is a private room, really nice. You can listen and not be distracted and so on. And next door is always a gym facility. And that for me is the real win within physio. If you can start to get people lifting or get people moving or get people exercising and being active, there's not much more powerful than that for them, if they're really struggling or if they're wanting to know how to do something. That's the real win.
Yeah, and it's you have got that team that you've got there, and I know a lot of the SEMs and the clinical, the physio team that you've got there. So, like, what is it particularly about the culture then that's so good?
I think that I'm not going to say that we're without egos at all, because that's not true, right? There are people who are really good at what they do, and with that kind of comes a little bit of a sort of, like I know what I'm doing. I'm pretty good at what I'm doing, and but that doesn't stop them finding time and giving up time to have a conversation with you about your patients and so on. So yeah, I don't think ego is always a negative thing. I think sometimes that's just a product of getting to where you've kind of got to in your career and knowing what you know, and sort of having an international audience that sort of recognizes that what you're doing is quite good work. But as I say, the door's always open. There's always an opportunity to have a chat. There's a friendly, somewhat banterous WhatsApp group that it's just that type of environment that is I think really positive, and it means that you can learn and they can learn from you, and that there's you grow together, really, and I think that's very strong.
Yeah, no, it's always seems great whenever we've run events there or gone in, and a lot of the guys they're very enthused. You can see how enthusiastic you are for doing what you're doing, and that's a great thing to have, isn't it? If you've got genuine passion and excitement to work with people and with clients.
Yeah, and Pure have really supported this research thing. Like, we're pretty unique. My role as head of research within a company like Pure, it's a pretty unique role within private practice, and they've been super supportive of that, because they recognize that to deliver evidence-based medicine, to really drive that as being the way in which we do things, it needs to have a strong advocate for it. And so they've sort of invested in that. They've invested in me, which I'm very grateful for. And hopefully with that, we brought about a number of changes and initiatives that ensures that we stay at the pointy end of evidence-based medicine.
Mm. Then in terms of data, that's something which there's so much data that's flying around now, for certainly for the consumer or the patients. What are your thoughts on the fact there's so much of it, and how do you make it useful?
Yeah, data is a challenge. Yeah, I've said that for a while. Really, there's no point in collecting something unless you've got a really clear strategy for what you're kind of going to do with it, and how it's going to affect change. One of our strongest examples of that, in the most recent sort of history, is that of outcome collection. And we're using a company called Simplicity. We're doing that within the MSK-PN, which is the musculoskeletal private network group. And we pulled together in order to all collect comparable outcomes, so that as a group across this private network, we're all getting similar information, so that we can start to bring it together and go, right, how effective is Pure being comparative to another company, or this group of companies. We're looking to take that information and put it back in front of private medical companies as well, insurers, and actually try and drive a little bit of that conversational piece that's different from what has been before. Sort of trying to weed out somewhat less effective, less effective physiotherapy or interventions. Really trying to show that what we do is effective, and this is what effective looks like in a really pragmatic way. Like I talked about before, it's like it's really applied. It's not a research study. This is sort of what's going on for the 10,000 plus patients that we're seeing per year through Pure. These are the outcomes that we're expecting. This is the amount of change that we're seeing, and we're pretty qualified group of clinicians, and that's what we can kind of expect. So if people are achieving significantly less than that, then, well, maybe we should ask some questions as to what they're doing. People are achieving much more, maybe we should ask some questions of what we're doing, and so it goes on.
Yeah, and so what trends do you see coming? Like, healthcare's changed a lot, really, prior to COVID, but also since COVID, it's changed a lot. Like, where do you see it going?
Healthcare in general, or do you think
That's a broad question,
MSK?
I know, but maybe rehab, because we talked about rehab at the start, or like sports medicine in private.
Yeah, I think that like AI is the buzzword, isn't it, really, and sort of going around at the moment. It's sort of like, what's artificial intelligence going to bring to the table to change what we're doing and how we're kind of doing it. I mean, in terms of time saving and effectiveness of communication, we've got an AI tool doing some of our note capture, that is producing sort of our patient letters and so on. And I we've got a study running at the moment that's looking at education as an intervention for people on a waiting list. I do believe that education remains an extremely powerful tool in our toolbox as clinicians. So getting to that diagnostic endpoint and educating our patient as to what is going on and what their recovery journey kind of looks like. And so if we can use AI to sort of summarize that really succinctly and present that back to a patient in a really timely fashion, then we're shifting the dial on that educational piece, which I think is brilliant. We've also done some work, speaking about innovation, with another company that has tried to use AI and motion capture to give you feedback whilst you're doing your exercises, so that you're doing your exercises a little bit more accurately. And this is coming off of your phone or off of the patient's phone, so it's sort of giving them live feedback. It's kind of physio in their room whilst they're, having left your clinic and working away for the next week or so. So there's these sorts of things. I think they're quite innovative. They're exciting. I think they're going to change things for sure.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And then you work at Queen Mary's then. So like, well, what's that? That always looks good. I see some of the stuff on social media, but you've got a really good group of educators there. And I know I've had Trevor on recently, and some of the other guys. It's like, how, I think it's got a good reputation, that setup. Like, how does that operation work?
Yeah, so I mean, we got a suite of postgraduate taught programs within sports and exercise medicine there at Queen Mary. That's what I lead, and we've also got postgraduate research aspect of that, so where PhD students are coming in and doing some study. We've also got a intercalated BSc, which is for medical students kind of coming through. So we've got a number of programs that operate out of Queen Mary, but all centered around sports and exercise medicine, and into MACP and advanced practice is kind of where we're going to take physio side of things. And you talked about the faculty. The faculty's amazing. We've got Trevor Pryor, we've got Ian Griffiths, we've got Nat Padia from a podiatric perspective, we've got Catherine Lefster, Nikos Maliaropoulos from Greece from a sports and exercise medicine sort of perspective, and physio, myself and Dylan, and then some fantastic sports medicines, sports science guys who are sort of bringing in various different aspects of sort of research methods and motion capture and these things as well. So yeah, that's a postgraduate, predominantly postgraduate program is what I'm involved in, and I do really feel quite passionately about that, because once more, that's kind of sharing of knowledge, that's trying to raise the bar of practice. It's sort of shifting the dial of practice, and getting people doing better physio, better medicine within the sporting context is the one. And so yeah, that works quite well.
And like for other, I'm intrigued by those books that you've got behind you. Like one of the questions I like to ask is about professional development outside of clinical practice. So do you do much in terms of that? Or like what do you do outside of the clinical bit?
Like for my own personal stuff, I think I did a short course not that long ago that was about behavior change. I was really interested in sort of aspects of behavior change. I enjoyed I enjoy reading a bit about sort of the origins of humanity is kind of like a bit of my stuff. So taking it back, light read. But yeah, just taking it a bit back of like I find society fascinating. Like how society ended up being the way in which it is, so complicated and interacting in a way. So I enjoy some reading. I enjoy some reading like that, which is good. I've sort of I don't tend to read too much fiction these days, but maybe I should lighten up a little bit and read a bit of fiction.
But there's sometimes I have that thought where you just actually stop and look at people's clothes, currency, cars, all of this stuff, and you actually think, how does any of this work? You go to all these shops. Sometimes I do it. And I say this to Gabby, my fiance, or to other people, and they sort of look at me, they're sort of like, what are you talking about? But it's like, actually, it's really incredible that even like the fact there's life on Earth, even all those things. It's like, how is the sun the perfect distance that you can go and get a tan one day and then be freezing the next? It's bizarre.
Yeah. Yeah, my wife does a similar sort of thing. If I start to get too much into that, she's just like, oh God, here he goes again, she says to the kids.
Yeah.
So she keeps me in check on that, which is good.
Yeah. Well, go on. What are some of those books there? Just anything that's non-clinical stuff.
What have I got? Sort of some Malcolm Gladwell. Always quite enjoyed reading a bit about Malcolm Gladwell. I've got the Culture Code, the Power of Habit, and so on. That's kind of into sort of like behavior, why people do what we do, why do we do what we do, what motivates us to do what we do. I'm always quite interested in that. And then actually the one that's not up there, but it's by my bed instead, for if I want to reread it really, which was I'm going to miss its name now, but it was sort of like the Science of Happiness was kind of one of those ones. And it was a cracking read, actually. Gaudat was the author, Gawa or Gawda.
Is that Mo Gaudat?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and he did a happiness or something around the happiness. But I was just like, oh, that's a kind of really quite cool, really quite inspiring book actually, and I did enjoy that. And that came about. There's some interesting things. I've sort of listened to a podcast. I think that might have been a podcast from I can't remember what podcast was there anyway, but he was on the podcast, and listened to that, and then read a book. That's where my last few book recommendations sort of come from. Train podcast, and then on. Yeah.
I know. Well, there's so much stuff that you can be listening to, reading. I think it is quite overwhelming, really. And like he's been on Stephen Bartlett a lot, hasn't he, Mo Gaudat? And it's
that was it. Yeah, I mean, it was that.
Yeah.
And you're right, it is overwhelming. And I sort of find myself, I engage with a podcast, not to put people off listening to this podcast, right? But I engage with the podcast for a time, and then I kind of go, "Oh, okay, that's given me mental saturation for a minute, and I need to just have a quiet train journey for a month, and then I might come back to listening to something again for the train journey." It's sort of because otherwise I'm kind of into, wow, man, there's just too many thoughts going on in my head. It's all too stimulating.
Well, I think that's it, isn't it? And I'm trying to do it. Like I'm I'm constantly, if I'm doing my stretches or whatever, I'll be watching YouTube or something. And I've tried to actively not do that now, where you're starting the day by just being there. And it's hard. I find it really hard to not have my phone with me or on checking it. You're watching a film and you're checking it. Like, how do you deal with that?
Uh, yeah, I am very conscious, like as in I think it has to become a conscious thing now to not do things rather than maybe before it was a bit more of a conscious thing to make sure you were doing something. Like now it's actually ensuring that you've got some time that is quiet, that you're not, you're not reading anything, literally you're staring into space or zoning out, like I think you need it. And sometimes I find my head will be buzzing through a day and it's just too much, like there's just too much kind of going on. And I do literally need to lie down and shut my eyes and just have a 5 minute, 10 minute, just sort of just calm down because it's just getting really, really busy. Um, that doesn't happen all the time, but I think that is kind of one of those things I am conscious of, is that you can, I think you can more easily nowadays be overstimulated, and actually what I kind of conscious, I just need to sometimes just be like, well, how can I understimulate? How can I just make sure that I'm sort of just chilled out a bit? Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, like, I've got two young kids, it's very busy, like you're off and around and doing things with them. Whereas I think sport often formed quite a good opportunity to do that. And actually, I cycle around London quite a lot. And even though that's quite hectic, you can't be on your phone really when you're on the bike. You shouldn't really. Sometimes guilty of it, but mostly not. You can't be reading things. You can't. You are just sort of there and doing. And so I really enjoy those moments. I cycle off to the clinic, cycle off to the uni, off of the train, because there's just not an opportunity to pick up a book or try and be stimulated by something else. Definitely headphones out, like that's not listening to music, just being present.
Yeah,
Present on
no,
the bike.
I think it is actually great. Like I love it when I come down and see you guys or I'm going around the place, get on the line bikes. Just
Yeah,
it's really, you're seeing amazing stuff. But like you say, I'm always reflecting for me, like what do I like doing? And I drove to Norwich last week, and I actually love driving because I can't be on my emails. I'm not checking my phone. I might be listening to something, radio, music, or whatever, but you are focused on things. Whereas here, it's easy to be checking out. There's a lot of stimulus,
yeah,
and actually limiting that is really powerful. So I'm constantly, like you said, there trying to be more conscious of that, because it actually, you realize a lot of this stuff you don't need to be doing a load of this stuff, but you're just doing it because you think you should, or you're missing out, or you're not being efficient or something.
yeah, yeah. And I think you get less productive too. Like it actually drives you in the wrong direction because you're ending up sort of like snippets and this and that, and you're never really actually getting into something. And then when it comes to the time that you need to get into doing something and seeing it through, it becomes really, really hard because it's so different from the way in which you've been operating. So
Yeah. Yeah,
cool.
well, on that note, what
Uh,
would not particularly around that, but like what would your advice be for people that are looking to get into physio, healthcare, research?
uh, Look, I think that that's a very personal kind of decision, and I think you've got to do it for the right reasons. Like I think that you've got to do a bit of internalizing of that and go, yeah, look, I care about people. I really enjoy, if we're talking about physio as a profession, I really enjoy working with individuals or speaking and interacting with people. I enjoy problem solving. I enjoy not necessarily, that aspect of not having the answers but trying to find the answers, or working with someone to try and find the answers, like that. Those are sort of the internal sort of characteristics that I think that you've got. And then if you're there and you're in it, like, be as enthusiastic towards it as you possibly can, like really throw everything at it. I think that physio as a profession um, is a very rewarding profession. I mean, if you really sort of invest into it, there's great opportunities. And because of what, the diversity of what I do now, like that, I'm not sort of, I'm not special. Like I've just thrown myself at opportunities that have come this way, and I've gone, oh wow, that's really sort of enthused me, and I've run with it. And they're there. You know, you can get into research as a physio. You can remain in clinical practice and have a great time within clinical practice. You can teach. You can do so many different things across a variety of different tranches of the profession as well. You know, whether that's respiratory or orthopedics or whatever, neuro. You know, and there's lots of it. So it's good.
Great. Well, I love that enthusiasm to finish. That was good. That's inspiring.
I am
So
enthusiastic about the profession. I really believe in it. I think it's extremely powerful tool. I do, and I think it is a great. You know, we're spoiled as an opportunity to get to know people. You know, I talked about my interest in humanity and social and so on. No, like, it's a genuine privilege to get to know people and work with people and help them to get better and have some skills that means that you're able to help people to get better. That is a real privilege. Um, and yeah, I enjoy doing it. Enjoy doing it.
great, love it. Now that it's good. It really does come across not just then, but the whole way through of how driven you are. And I think it's nice for me to hear that research element because a lot of the time I feel like it's quite removed from clinical practice, and that applied
Yeah,
bit I think is so pivotal because otherwise there's a load of stuff that goes on that you might question. Well, is that because of funding? You sort of think how helpful is this being all this stuff over here?
yeah, no, and I think there's been a strong emphasis to drive toward public and patient involvement in research, and I think that's a real strength that has been implemented. And engaging people so that what you're doing is relevant and people care about it, and it's meaningful. Sometimes there will be stuff that's removed. That's the nature of it. Like some basic science type stuff can't very easily be directly applied into clinical practice, but it's feeding into that information bank. But other of it is much more applied, and we need a bit of all of it. But yeah, we want to really make sure that people are aware of what's happening in that space, in that the science is here and the practical application is there, and this is what we need to be doing.
Good. We'll keep doing it. And thank you very much for sharing.
Cheers, Andy.
Brilliant. Cheers, Simon.